Folks, this is Fernando doing our video for the More Survivalist, and if you're interested in understanding better what it's like the day-to-day life after an economic collapse, stick around because that's pretty much what I'm going to be addressing in this video. For you guys that have been following my channel or my work in websites and such, my writings, then you probably know this, but there's always new people in YouTube that may not know this. I was born in Argentina. I lived most of my life in Argentina. I did live in the United States for a few years when I was little. Maybe that's the accent thing, confuses some folks. But yes, most of my life I spent it living in Argentina. I moved a little bit, but mostly in Buenos Aires. And I was always interested in survival. There wasn't any preppers back in the day. It was just survival and survivalists. And not only that, I was interested also in firearms, in knives, even flashlights. Back in the day when the only flashlight worth having was a mag light, before the LED era started. So many of these things that today have more of a following, I was already very much interested in all of that. But the moment where I definitely learned the most about urban survival, modern survivalism, and specifically regarding economic collapse survival was when the economy of Argentina went down, collapsed in 2001. A default devaluation of the currency, presidents resigning, and pretty much everything falling apart. That was very much an important learning experience. And that's where I started writing more, participating. I've always enjoyed forums. I like the interaction with people, sharing ideas. There's sometimes that you're kind of arguing over things that are not important, but in general you can find good people to discuss and share different ideas. Also writing, well, of course, for my website, The Modern Survivalism. I wrote my book, The Modern Survival Manual, as well. And since then, I've been very much interested in this, specifically the aspect of urban survival and modern survivalism in terms of a more complicated future than the reality that we already live in. And now, of course, with Greece, the situation with Greece, the devaluation in China as well, there's again another wave of people interested in all this, trying to understand this. Now, this video is inspired by a thread in a forum in ar15.com where someone, I have the name right here, Pangea, he made a post, and the post is titled "An Economic Collapse. What does it really mean?" And I think that his approach was quite honest, wondering what is it like? What is it really like on the day-to-day basis of life after an economic collapse? And his post says the following, I have it here. It says, "I hear the warnings and dire predictions of a pending collapse of our economy due to either outside influence or domestic stupidity. What does it really mean to the daily goings on of the average American? Does it mean that goods will be so expensive as to be out of reach of all but the most wealthy, or will it mean that nothing is to be had at any price? I'm wondering what a typical day would be like. Everyone stays home and suffers, or will it only affect certain portions of the population?" Good, honest questions, and I think that his concerns, his doubts may, other people's may have those as well. And by reading some of the replies, you really understand that not many folks, not many people understand really what an economic collapse means. They have this idea of, some have a better idea or not, but in general, I see that most folks simply do not comprehend how complex it is. Some of the replies there in the forum were like, yes, have food and have guns. People are going to be starving. And food and guns are perfect. I always repeat that you should have a good amount of food. Food is definitely important. But it's so much more complex than just that. And I understand this not only because of what I went through in Argentina years after the specific 2001 collapse, where the consequences of an economic collapse just don't disappear. They stay in the society for years to come. It's not a short period of time thing. It goes on for decades. Sometimes it just changes entirely the reality that you will be dealing with pretty much for the rest of your life. And life is like this, this wheel, the circle, and sometimes things get better, get worse. But an economic collapse, a true economic collapse, where the country lost all credibility, where there's a social, and even a political breakdown, and everything has to be rebuilt. The trust from outside the country, from the international community, the trust within the country, people really trusting again. And in many cases, Argentina is a good example of that. The damage done by people that take advantage of an economic collapse is very serious and just doesn't go away. You have to understand, one of the important things to understand, guys, if you're watching, if you have the patience to go all the way with this video, these are important things. An economic collapse is not an act of God. It's not like a natural disaster where you maybe have an earthquake. And yes, there is a responsibility there, depending on how well those structures were built and such. But at the end of the day, it's one of those acts of God. It's something that happens that no man actually created that. In the case of an economic collapse, there's people that created such a thing. There's people that benefit greatly from it. And this is a very important aspect to understand. And this is definitely one of the things that most folks out there clearly just do not get. They do not understand that a small portion of the society, and it's not the 1%, it's more like the 0.00001%. It's a handful of people that, some of the richest people in the planet that pretty much run the world, they benefit greatly from these things. They manipulate the economy, and people end up paying the consequences. But going through some of the comments, I was reading here about, I was talking about food and how there were no fat people during the Great Depression and such. It is true that food is extremely important. It is true that food is one of your main priorities, but do not think that an economic collapse will mean thin, starving people. There may as well be people that are starving after an economic collapse. In real poor societies, there are people that starve. In Argentina, people did starve, and even today, about 10 people, 15 people die each day because of starvations. They actually starve to death. They don't have enough money to buy the food that they need. They start getting thin. They don't have the nutrition. They end up in the hospital, and they end up dying. They simply starve to death. It happens. But it's not the greatest thing. Actually, one of the things that you will notice, let's talk right now about how this would go down in the United States. And this is no crystal ball thing. Many of these things are already happening, because the process that you are seeing in the United States, it's already started. You can see the trend of where it's going. And actually what you notice is, interestingly enough, is that instead of being an economic collapse is about poverty, is about poor people, but it's such a short word, doesn't begin to describe how complex it is and all the aspects and all the different realities that it involves. Poverty in the United States may as well be more fat people. All right, many survivalists think that yes, after the economic collapse, everyone is starving. I have my food, I have my bunker, I have my homestead, I have my guns to defend all of that. And that's it. They just don't comprehend. If you do more research, you actually see everything that I'm explaining here. But it takes a lot of work. It's not just about living through the economic collapse like I did. It's about reading how it happens in other places. Read about how it happens in Greece, how it has happened in other parts of the world, in other moments, and you will understand better. What you will see, rather than people starving in a post-economic collapse America, you will be seeing more fat people. I actually remember when the president of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, she proudly announced that the obesity rates in Argentina had been going up since the economic collapse of 2001. That was, she used the words, a rich country's disease. Obesity, a rich country's disease. That actually just shows how ignorant of a person she is. If you understand better, you realize that it's actually the other way around. It's poverty that brings up obesity. if you look at the American society, you will find that the most obese people are the poor, not the rich. Rich folks in the United States, they have more culture. They know, they have more information as to how to take care of themselves better. They work out more. They eat healthier. They buy better quality food because they simply can afford that, and they know how to buy, and they know what to buy, what to eat. Yes, of course, there's folks out there that may not have a good, they're not very wealthy, but they are interested in all of this. They are informed. They even grow their own food, and they eat pretty well. That's not the majority of the population. In most cases, the poor American will be an overweight person, will be even an obese person. The kind of food that he's able to buy, not only does he not have the knowledge, the information, but in many cases, the money that he has, he's going to be spending it buying the junk food, the cheaper food, those calories with very little nutritional value. If you just stuff your face with McDonald's, with donuts and such, you're going to be obese, but you're not going to be healthy, right? We all understand that. We've talked about this before. So as poverty gets worse after an economic collapse in the United States, you will see more obese people, not skinny, starving people just trying to break into your house. This idea that these skinny, starving folks will try to break into your house, it's not that much of a real approach to things, right? Now, some of the questions that we had here, I'd like to address them. What does it really mean to the daily goings of the average American? Let's suppose, it's a good way to look at it. What would your normal day look like? You get up one day, correct? You get up one morning feeling not very healthy because maybe you haven't been eating very well because of everything that I'm explaining. The average, let's look at it this way: an average day in the average American after an economic collapse. The average American after an economic collapse will be a poor American. Poverty is not something that most Americans completely understand, and there's different types of poverty. There's the starving poverty of the African poor, that he's this thin and he's starving to death. Then there's the poverty that you have in places like America. You will have your house, you will have your big screen TV, you may even have a somewhat okay truck. But let's suppose this person wakes up. You wake up not feeling great. You get up early in the morning because you really have to work. An economic collapse does not mean that you're working less. It actually means that if you are among the lucky ones that actually has a job, if you do have a job after an economic collapse, you're going to be working pretty hard for it because you have to maintain that job. And when there's a high unemployment rates, if you're not doing your job properly, you get fired and someone else is happy enough to replace you. It also means that you're going to be working for less money. All right, this idea, and sometimes you see folks that have different political opinions and such, and in some cases they think that poor people choose to be poor, and they're poor because they're not working hard enough. I understand that not everyone has the same life experience, and not everyone has that much of an understanding how things really work out, but in most cases it's actually poor people that work the hardest. I know because I've seen it myself. I've seen, yes, there are some poor people that are not doing their best, but I've seen poor folks that you feel ashamed by how much. I mean, there's folks that are dirt poor that bust their backs every single day in ways you wouldn't believe. So this would be one of the realities of the day-to-day life after an economic collapse. You get up and you get ready for this job that is not paying you well enough, and that you're definitely not enjoying. You have your breakfast with whatever it is that you can afford to put on the table and consider yourself lucky. Maybe not the most nutritional wise diet, but you eat whatever it is that you have with your family. You have maybe one or two kids, maybe just one. Maybe you simply cannot afford, after an economic collapse, to have more than one kid. Maybe you cannot even afford to have a single kid. Maybe it's beyond your budget. You're responsible and you don't have any because you cannot afford it, correct? You get ready for work, you take a shower. The water will probably be contaminated if it's anything like Argentina, because the infrastructure is much worse. The companies are not doing as much of a job in keeping water up to the standards that they used to be. So you get ready, you get into your car, ready to go to work. Your car is going to be much older than you hope it's going to be, because the financial situation is not very good. You start driving to your workplace in a very much crowded in a very much crowded road. It's going to be taking you probably twice as long. The commute time maybe twice as long, because roads are not as good as they used to be. Cars are, in general, there's going to be more cars breaking down in the road, creating more problems. There maybe going to be even protest demonstrations on the streets and make traffic more complicated than it used to be. You're going to be working for quite a bit of time, several hours, working all day long. And if you're not one of those that ponies up and goes for the extra hours, working late during the day, you risk losing your job, and you're probably going to be suffering your boss as well. One of the things that you notice is that when all this happens, the stress level in the society in general is much higher. And just like you are having a crappy time, your boss is having a crappy time. And in general, the boss will release his stress and tensions to the guy that is down on the food chain. So you have to put up with a boss that he's pissed, he's nervous, he's taking all of that onto you, and you drive back home, same thing. You're wondering how you're going to be making it with the bills, which are just not enough. Your health cover is probably going to be awful or average, depending on how lucky you are. You're going to be wondering, how is it that you're working so hard and the bills, you just cannot keep up with them. That would be the typical day-to-day life in a post-economic collapse US, right? Regarding some of the questions that we had here, does it mean that goods will be so expensive as to be out of reach of all but the most wealthy, or does it mean that nothing to be had at any price? No, there will be stuff that will be affordable. For example, you will have the food, the crappy, poor quality food. That's probably what most people will end up buying. The more healthier, organic, fresh, better quality ones, that's the stuff that only the ones that are doing a little bit better off. You're not gonna be able to buy the latest car. Maybe you will if you're slightly less poor, so as to get into debt, so as to buy a new truck, and you have this massive debt because of a stupid truck that you have in the driveway. Maybe you're lucky enough to do that kind of mistake. Then it's going to be impacting you in other ways. It's going to be impacting you in terms of you not being able to have the kind of better medical cover that you wish you have, or even if you have it, there's going to be all these little details in the contract where many diseases or many specific medical complications are not going to be covered by your healthcare contract. So you're going to be struggling with that. It happens already enough. It's something that's simply going to be getting worse. The quality of education that you're going to be having, it's not going to be the same. You are going to be having, right? You have to understand, a post-economic collapse, America will mean a majority of poor people. Poor people in a different way from what you see in Africa or some of the poorest parts of the world. It's going to be a different version of poor. It's going to be a developed country version of poverty. You're going to be having a car. You're going to be having a roof over your head. But things like quality medical care, quality education, that's going to be huge. You're going to be seeing a huge gap between those that can afford quality education, maybe paying for private schools, for some of the more expensive colleges, and then you're going to be seeing folks that just kind of drag along and get by with whatever crumbs are left. A crucial aspect of understanding life after an economic collapse is understanding that it's going to be a huge disparity between those that have and those that do not have. Now, it's so important that you comprehend that this is there's no, this is, again, it's not an act of God. It's some people that caused the economic collapse, and those folks are the folks that run the media, are the folks that own the companies that you're working at. And if you don't get this, if you don't understand this, it's much harder to defend yourself from it, right? It's important to do that, just like I did in Argentina. I got to a point where I turned on the TV and I knew exactly that 90% of the channels in TV, radio, printed press and such, it was 90%, maybe even more, owned by the government and with a very clear pro-government agenda. And that's not in your best interest. Same thing is already happening in the United States. Most of the media outlets, and it's not that difficult to understand. This is no conspiracy theory of mine. It's just simply common sense. Mainstream media is owned by certain groups of people, which happen to be the same folks that own some of the most powerful companies in the planet. So they have their own interests. And if you don't see that, then you're really missing the big picture. Many of the things, for example, when they talk about minimum wage, for example, and that's the kind of thing when they talk about raising the minimum wage, everyone would say, "Oh, wait a minute! You were watching on Fox TV, and some of the some of the wealthiest people, there were like, what? We're going to be raising minimum wages? That's insane! That's crazy talk. What? Are we going to be paying someone working in McDonald's $1 million a month? Like, well, maybe not $1 million. You maybe could pay a little bit better. That's a key aspect of the economic collapse. That's a key aspect because the social engineering part is very interesting, but you have to understand what's being done to you. You're being told, and many of these things, actually, some of you folks watching this may support this stance that some of the wealthiest people in the planet have. Like, wait, no, there shouldn't be a way of raising minimum wage. That's what, socialism? That's redistribution of wealth? Well, if you think about it, America was at its best when there was less of an inequality. If you think about it, in the 50s, there was far less inequality than you have today. Today, not only in the United States, around the world, you have the greatest amount of inequality between those that have and those that do not have. And it's really not about, it's not about socialism, it's not communism. It's simply understanding that you are being left with so little and very few people are getting so much. As the pyramid is shifting, the difference between the majority of people that have very little and those very few that have so much, that's actually how third world countries look like, right? It's not that you should allow the mainstream media to fill your head with these ideas. The typical social pyramid of a poor country, of a third world country, is just that. It's a majority of people with very little, no middle class, and a very small, very powerful elite. That's what you end up with when you have a completely when you have no distribution of wealth whatsoever. You have one guy that has everything and everyone else has nothing. That's how a third world country looks like, and you do not want to end up like that. All right. A key aspect of understanding an economic collapse is that there's no middle class. Right now, it's been getting worse, but it used to be that in the United States you had a very strong middle class. Middle class is the thing that makes countries great. And if you think about it, if you have a very strong middle class and you have a very small amount of poor people and a very small amount of people that are very wealthy, that's better for everyone. That's better for you. May be watching this video and think, yeah, I am middle class. That's me. That's why I don't want any redistribution of wealth. That's why I don't want any of that socialism. That's why I'm with I'm with Warren Buffett and Donald Trump. I don't want any redistribution of wealth. These are the things that, without you realizing, when you have an economic collapse, you will be going down and becoming poor, supporting these ideas that really are fed through the mainstream media by these rich, extremely powerful elites that are running things, and you're just being robbed under your noses without you realizing. So that's what you're looking at in a post-economic collapse America. You're looking at becoming poor without even noticing it. And in Argentina would be a great example for that, because Argentina used to have a very powerful, a significant middle class. that middle class disappears. After an economic collapse, the middle class disappears. 99% of the middle class becomes poor. Only a very few manage to make the jump to the top. That would be a critical aspect of an economic collapse. Understanding that middle class pretty much gone. Yeah, losing my voice here. Sorry for that. One more question. I'm wondering what a typical day would be like. Everyone stays home and defense. Well, defense is important. Defense will be an important part of life after an economic collapse. Defending your home, defending yourself. Your homes, most American homes, they are just no burglar bars. Very few actually even have alarms. All that will have to change, and in self-defense as well. It's not so much about living in your bunker with your rifle waiting. It's going to be long term. It's going to be decades into this. You still have to go to your work. You still have your job, because if not, you cannot pay the bills that still pile up. You still have to pay for those, and you still have to find ways of defending yourself in a much more violent society. In road rage, the incidents where you maybe had a discussion or a fist fight, you're going to be getting shot, you're going to be getting stabbed. It's a more violent society in general. That means concealed carry, that means not having your rifle and your low-bearing vest full of magazines, but your daily carry weapon. That's the only thing you'll have to defend yourself when it actually really matters. A very complex topic. Guys, if you're really interested in all this stuff, I have my book, The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse, available in Amazon. The link there below, where I cover all this stuff and of course much more. And if you have any questions or any specific things you'd like to ask, comments below, ask away, I'll do my best to reply. Guys, it's going to be all for now. Remember to subscribe, take care, thumbs up, it's always appreciated. See you in our next video. Have a great day.